Covered in like cat pee stains and little scratches from them jumping up on top of it. So after buying a house foreclosed for a lot less money than originally anticipated, I had a chunk of change left over. And I decided to do the responsible adult thing with that and take a chunk of it and blow it on a car. I'd had a Toyota MR2 Turbo previously, and kind of the logical upgrade path for me at the time was an Acura NSX, but I was kind of keeping an open mind to other possibilities. But I had still shortlisted the NSX, the FD Generation RX-7, and the Lotus Esprit S4 or S4S if I could find one, which were the kind of the hottest of the four-cylinder Esprits before they went to the V8 twin turbo. I realized that everybody on the rotary forums, all they did was work on their cars, and most of the Lotus guys were not far behind. I'm fairly handy, but I didn't want to be one of those guys who just ended up with an infinite project. So that kind of left me with an NSX that I wanted to shop for, and that wasn't the cheapest option. But common wisdom was that in 2006, 2007 was that you could get a good NSX for $25,000. Not so much anymore, obviously, but at the time you could either pay $25,000 for a car with some miles on it, and it was probably going to be solid, or you could pay a little less than that, but you could expect to quickly make up the difference with probably some deferred maintenance or taking care of a few small niggles. So I started looking for the special case, and I found it on eBay. It was a car in White Plains, New York, that had 212,000 miles on it. It was a 1992, and the gentleman had it listed for $16,500. Clean title and allegedly a service history, allegedly well maintained, and allegedly in good condition. I get into some discussions with this guy, and he was very forthcoming and helpful. He actually gave me the serial number off the transmission so I could ascertain that, yes, this one was in the snap ring range, but he felt priced accordingly, and that's probably a fair point. He also was able to send me some of the service records as well as refer me to the Acura dealership where it had been serviced for most of its life. The gentleman who owned it was the first owner of the car. He'd bought it new in 1992 and used it as a daily driver in his real estate business. That led me to kind of ask fewer questions, given that I knew this guy was probably losing his shirt right now and was unloading some luxury assets to make sure he could keep the lights on. I didn't dig too much further, but I felt like I'd done my due diligence, and so I put a bid in on it. And lo and behold, I lost the auction. So I was bummed, and I did send the guy one last message. I said, hey, unfortunately I didn't win the bidding, but if for whatever reason that deal falls through, give me a call. This guy calls me. He says, hey, so the dealer that won the auction decided they didn't want it. Are you ready to go? I'm like, yeah. I can be on a plane next weekend. The seller picked me up at the airport and took me back to the house to look the car over, and we went to look at it, and this guy is, talking to him on the way home. He clearly had some attachment to the car. Like, he enjoyed it and liked it for what it was. I think he had he had kind of his own stories with it. Like, he had met his wife while driving the car and things like that. And I kind of joked with him at the time because I was single. I was like, oh, maybe it'll work for me. Who knows? We get back to the house, and I could tell that his version of love and affection for the car was not necessarily what especially your detailer would call love and affection. It had been living in his attached garage with his herd of cats. And I don't think it had probably moved. At the point that I looked at it, I don't think it had probably moved since he pulled it outside to take pictures of it for the eBay listing. It was covered in like cat pee stains and little scratches from them jumping up on top of it and back down. It was uncovered. The front bumper had a kind of a place where the paint was bubbling up on it. It was rough looking. And we get out and take it on a drive, and it's kind of like, it's got like it's throwing a check engine code already, and he kind of balked. I was like, hey, could you, give it some stick in second gear and get it over 6,000 RPM? I want to make sure the VTEC actually still engages. And he kind of balked at that, and he's like, oh, public roads, I don't drive crazy like that. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever, fine. I looked over the car, and it was rough, but I won't say that it wasn't already kind of priced accordingly. The only part that I felt was maybe less than fully disclosed was the level of damage to the front bumper. The story he told is that he had left the parking brake disengaged at some point in time, or it hadn't engaged all the way, and it had rolled underneath a truck. I found the reason that the air conditioning didn't work is because whatever he had rolled up underneath or over the top of had completely crimped one of the AC lines in half and put a dent in the subframe behind it. It was subframe, it was a cross member, but nonetheless, there was a dent in a big piece of metal, which means this is maybe not the lightest hit in the world. That led to the sort of surreal moment, and this is kind of the balls you have as a 26-year-old, is I'm sitting in this guy's kitchen eating a sandwich that he's fixed for me, telling him why I'm not going to pay him the agreed upon amount of $16,500, because I was like, it's going to take some amount of money just to put that back right, and that wasn't really completely accurately disclosed in the thing. And he was, of course, a shrewd negotiator, so we ended up right in the middle, and I kept my $500 and walked out with the car for $16,000 even, which, as far as I can research on the internet, is the cheapest clean title manual transmission Acura NSX ever to change hands. This was back before everybody had a smartphone. I certainly didn't, so I didn't have an automated GPS device to just tell me where to go and tell me where traffic sucks and things like that. So I had my printed out MapQuest or whatever it was directions at the time that I planned on taking home, and I'd thought this out and I was like, I really don't want to go through like the city or New Jersey, so I'm going to go ahead and just budget the extra 45 minutes to get out of town, go west and go into Pennsylvania and then down I-81. And I had I-81 kind of memorized by that point because I'd driven it a number of times from Pennsylvania into Tennessee and back, so I figured once I got there, I was golden. But my very generous seller was like, no, man, that's not the quickest way to get out of here. I got you here. I'll let you follow me out of town. I'll get you down to the States. You take this road, this turnpike, to this other road, and then you'll be there. It'll save you an hour. Probably an hour later, I was lost in Brooklyn. And at least to my observation, it was not the part of Brooklyn that I would want to be lost in, with an expensive looking car that I don't really know the mechanical condition of, but I know it's not perfect. But after some ado and having probably burned an extra hour rather than saved an hour, I made it back to the Jersey Turnpike, where I promptly got stuck in Patriots game day traffic. I found the nearest rest stop I could and found like a paper map. I got back on, dealt with some traffic for another 15 minutes, and then turned off on a turnpike to get over to Pennsylvania. And that's about the time the speedometer died. It had been a little bit flaky and kind of been bouncing around, but I thought it was maybe just the really terrible roads around New York City that was kind of making it do funny stuff, but no, dead as a doornail. And I'm like, okay, it's fine. Like, I actually paid attention because it was doing weird stuff, and I had the presence of mind to memorize the RPM in fifth gear for 65, 70 miles an hour, so I can work with this. Around Maryland, as it's getting dark, the dashboard lights all die. It's not the best, but it was still manageable. What wasn't manageable was knowing that this car had a built-in, according to the ad, state-of-the-art built-in radar detector system. Because after I get done with Pennsylvania and Maryland, I have to go through Virginia for the last 6 or 8 hours of my drive home. And any of you that are familiar with the state of traffic law enforcement in Virginia will know that many things are not tolerated there. Speeding of the even modest variety, but especially speeding of any modest variety with an active radar detector. I had not taken the time to figure out how to adjust it or turn it off. So I end up driving through Virginia at night with no speedometer, no dash lights, and basically an active pull me over beacon that I do not know how to disable. Fortunately, that's where the schadenfreude ends here. I did make it back to Knoxville, Tennessee, unmolested by law enforcement. I think the cell code count when I arrived and after I got a chance to actually pull all the codes was somewhere between 12 and 15 for various maladies, including the speed sensor and an O2 sensor and the VTEC solenoid, which was the reason that wouldn't engage, because it totally wouldn't at the time. But all's well that ends well. 10 years later, I still have a fully functional Acura NSX. with now 267,000 miles on it. I still take it to the track regularly, it generally behaves itself, and we have a good time.